during this process, which is 18 minutes exactly apparently, to tell you everything that you ever wanted to know about surrogacy. Just raise your hand because this is a small group, so I can answer any questions that you have. I've been listening to all the presentations today, so I thought I might actually just start by saying some of the things that I thought might scare people when I was listening to some of the talks. And one of the biggest things actually that I took out of it was the relationship with the surrogate. It seemed like during the panel that everybody was referring to their surrogate as a new member of the family. And a lot of the couples were visiting with their surrogate frequently after the baby was born. So you saw that one of the surrogate moms was talking about how she sees, even 3 years after the delivery, the child every month. And one of the other couples was talking about how they are going to stay in touch for life, which I think is unusual. Our agency has had about 2,500 surrogacies completed over the years. And I would say that that's probably an anomaly of the long-term extended relationship. Not that you can't have that, not that that isn't a wonderful thing for the people that were speaking there, but in general, I think that it's unusual to have that kind of closeness with your carrier for such an extended period of time. So most people have a really good relationship with their carrier. What's typical is they do talk once a week, they do go to some doctor's appointments. After delivery, sure, they check in on the person, they send them flowers, but more common is a Christmas card once a year and maybe one telephone call. Some people drift off and don't talk at all. Some people do have a much closer relationship, like the people there, but I think it's very unusual to consider them part of your family and be going to like Christmas dinners and holidays. So I thought as a parent, because I have 3 kids from a carrier, I thought that if I was sitting in the audience that would scare me, because part of what I thought of, and which I think most people think of, is that this is going to be mine and my partner's child, and that we're going to raise this child together, and that although we're going to thank the carrier for this wonderful gift, that it would be an option to have her in our lives, but not mandatory. And so I did want to just throw that out there in case that you think a little bit differently, that isn't the way everybody's journey takes place. So some of the things that I'd like to tell some people about are most people here from New York. Yeah. So there are some changes in New York coming around that, especially that same-sex couples should be very aware of. So last year I did this talk and I talked a lot about the tax deduction that one could take if they were married in New York and did the second parent adoption after birth to get the non-bio partner on. So basically when you have a child through a carrier, there are 2 ways that you can go on the birth certificate, right? Both parents could be a married couple, go on the birth certificate through what we call a parentage order. And that's where you go to court when the carrier is pregnant and you terminate her rights and say, okay, these are the 2 men that are going to be parents. Please put these people on the birth certificate. The second way is you put the bio dad on the birth certificate with the carrier. And then after the baby is delivered in New York State, we go back to the court. We say, okay, we're going to add the second parent through what's called the second parent adoption. And then that birth certificate is amended. If you were a married couple post the Doma-Windsor case, if you're a married couple, it's treated differently now than was pre. So before, if you were a married couple married in the state of New York, the federal government still did not recognize your marriage. So if you did a second parent adoption under the tax code, if you are a married couple and you adopt your spouse's child, you cannot get that money back as a tax credit from the government. For adoptions for a non-biological child, for a non-married couple, get up to $13,000 in basically free money from the government. So before the Windsor case, even if you were married, you would be considered not married by the federal government, right? So the federal government would consider you an unmarried couple even if you were married in New York. So if you were not married and did this, if you were married and did the second parent adoption and you made under, I think it's $220,000, but the exact figures are in the packet. If you didn't get one, you can get one. I have an article about it pre-DOMA, post-DOMA. You could get a tax credit. So now if you are married, the federal government does recognize you as married, which is wonderful, right? But you're losing that discriminatory benefit that you were going to get, which is you can no longer take the tax credit for adopting your parent's child. So somebody called me, one of our gay couples that's having a baby on Friday, and said, we're going to get married this weekend because our baby is due. And I'm like, wait, maybe you want to postpone your wedding a little bit because you might save $13,000. And this is why. Because if they were so they didn't postpone their wedding. But want you to be financially aware of what the tax consequences are. So this should be something, when you say, should I get married, obviously marriage kind of takes a lot of things, right? Most people don't get married just for money, right? But if you were taking into account the timing of your marriage, you might want to take into account whether or not you would like to do a second parent adoption and your incomes, and whether or not you can take advantage of this tax credit. So it is something to keep in mind. Also, New York has legislation pending right now, which is something I thought was interesting. None of the speakers actually, it's something called the Child Parent Security Act. It is pending. It has not reached, it has not gotten out of committee. It's been pending for about a year now. It's to make paid surrogacy legal. Right now, you cannot have a paid surrogate in New York. This does not mean you cannot have a surrogate in New York. People think that. It means you cannot have a paid surrogate in New York. It is to make paid surrogacy legal in New York. So, will that pass? That your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I have been involved a little bit with the legislation. I actually wrote the legislation last year in New Jersey that passed both legislators, and Governor Christie vetoed it. And I think in New York you have the opposite problem. I believe the governor will easily sign a law, but you have a very Republican constituent to get through, and I think that that's hard when you have such a hotly contested item. So that will remain to be seen. But the legislation is pending right now. You also have a lot of changes in insurance for surrogacy. So I can tell you a little bit, because I've been getting a lot of questions about it, but the biggest thing is Obamacare. If Obamacare comes through as it's supposed to come through, it is likely that all surrogate mothers will be covered for maternity, and all newborns will be covered for newborn care, because every child will have a right and access to the exchange. However, the government obviously hasn't decided this since they've been closed for a week. So this is not something that's going to be that predictable or anyone can tell you the answer to. So it may, if you are just starting your journey, you may have more answers to whether or not it will be easy to get a gestational carrier that is insured.
One speaker was talking about the difference between it with Obamacare covering prenatal costs versus maternity costs, and try to differentiate that. Is that a...
You mean newborn versus maternity? Because prenatal is maternity.
That's what I thought, and they were trying to say that it was that Obamacare, it was less sure that the prenatal care would be covered, but the birth and after would definitely.
Yeah, the birth and after definitely will be, because the birth and after is a newborn citizen of the United States. There's no longer a compensation issue involved, right? So right now, the way it's drafted is under these exchanges, any child is entitled to be covered. So you will be able to buy, even if you're a foreign resident or illegally here or live in Paris, or, you know, insurance for any child born on U.S. soil. So if you can buy insurance for a child born on U.S. soil, then if you have a NICU baby, you'll be able to buy insurance for that. And those are the bigger costs, to be honest. And not that pregnancies can't be expensive. I guess you could have somebody bleed out and have a $500,000 bill. But that's more unlikely than you have a 6-week preemie set of twins that cost $500,000 and end up being fine. That's more a likely scenario. The issue really with Obamacare is whether or not, when he says every pregnant woman has to be insured, whether or not that an exclusion for what I would call a work for pay or profit would apply. So even though there was a lot of talk that surrogate compensation is not really compensation, or it's compensation, okay? So these women are getting some, whether it's profit is a different question, right? They're getting reimbursed, whether it's for living expenses, whether or not they're making a profit. That's a legal definition, and what is considered a profit, and will that be a permissible exclusion? So I do think it would be likely that the pregnancies will be covered as well, but maybe I could be wrong, so it really is a crapshoot with that, but the newborn coverage would be covered. So most carriers, everybody has different opinions. So for our agency, we find probably 200 or 300 carriers every year. And in my view, carriers definitely are very generous. They do have motivations that are not 100% monetary, but I do think that, as with everything, that there is a monetary component to the reason why people do it. So even though in a lot of the talks there was more of 100% altruism, I think that if you as a couple or as a single go into it thinking that it's 100% altruism, I think that that is a little bit biased, because when our company advertised for carriers, if we put an ad in that you weren't going to get compensated, I can tell you, you wouldn't get anybody. And it used to be about 5 years ago that carriers could write how much they expected to be compensated on their applications, and nobody wrote zero. So they all had, numbers in mind. So I do think that, but I do think that it's true that there's a bit of altruism involved as well. So if you ask me, I have 3 kids from carriers. I started doing this in 1998 when my twin boys were born. From a carrier, and if you told me that I would have to do all of these surrogacies for free, I wouldn't be there. But that doesn't mean that I don't love my job, and I'm very passionate about it, and I write legislation, so I think that's something to keep in mind as well. You have a question?
Yep. Have you come across carriers that don't want to carry for LGBT?
Absolutely, but it's not just LGBT. It's, for instance, one of the things that, the first thing that we do, okay, people call our office to become a carrier. First thing they do is go into our online database. So in our online database, the first thing that they're asked is, will you carry for a gay couple? Will you carry for a straight couple? Will you carry for an Asian couple? Will you carry for single dad, non-English speaking? So there will be some people who write, who are very educated and say, I want a gay couple because they all get pregnant. Because if you were just thinking about doing this, right, you want to do this for someone who's going to have a baby. You don't want to do this for someone who's 46 years old trying to use her own eggs and her chances are 0.5%, right? You want to do it for the gay couple who's going to use those 29-year-old eggs, and they're going to get 80% chance pregnant on the first try. So, well, you do have people who say, I don't want to work with a gay couple. You have a lot of carriers who say, I want to work with a gay couple. And also, being a straight couple who has done this with my husband, I can tell you that gay couples are far easier to work with. and there's certain very logical reasons to it. No gay couples comes to me and says, I've been trying for 5 years to have a baby and had 12 miscarriages and had a stillbirth, right? So you don't usually have those kinds of pent-up frustrations. No gay couple comes in and says, I'm jealous of the woman carrying the baby because I grew up putting pillows in my tummy thinking that I was going to be the pregnant person, because we have bigger problems than that if that's what happened to you, right? There are, with women, there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of, why can't I do this myself? There's a lot of expense that has already been spent and wasted with no end result. When you have a gay couple, most of them are excited. They're nice to the carriers. They send them presents and flowers. And then you have straight couples who are angry and poor because they just spent $250,000 on medical expenses trying to have a baby for the past 7 years, and they have nothing. They're out of insurance coverage, they're out of money, they're mortgaging their homes. So, I mean, from that perspective, there are some advantages that you have. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Is that pool to pick from relatively small, or do you come across people are usually just checking off like?
Most people check off they'll work with anyone, but there's a very large number of people who won't work with people who don't speak English. Because let's say about 10 or 20% of our clientele are from like China or France or Iran, and they want to be able to have some communication with a couple, and that's very hard if they don't speak English. You had a question?
What is the first criteria or something that is really a red flag for you when you check or screen the carriers?
Well,
and what do you do differently than others, I guess?
As far as the screening, the top 5 things that people get rejected for are body mass index, which is how heavy they are. So, unfortunately in the United States, that's a big problem. So, people can't have extremely high BMIs. So, that's our highest reject rate. Also, we don't take anyone who's never had a baby. No matter how many times I put this in bold on the top of the application, they still apply. Nobody on antidepressants or a history of postpartum, that's about 10%. We also have criminal history, no DWIs, history of drugs or alcohol. That's a big reject rate as well. Also, unfortunately, state. I cannot tell you how many times I tell people, if you live in New York State, don't send in our 26-page application. Because it takes at least an hour and a half to fill out all the stuff we're asking you to fill out. But we get applications from New York, we get them from Washington State, we get them from Michigan, all illegal states, so that's not going to help. Our process basically is, we're going to screen our carriers very well. We have never had a carrier try to keep the baby, no pay carrier, run away, fail to abort. They all have criminal background checks, driving record checks, same with their partner or spouse. They have drug, alcohol, nicotine. We send social workers to home to make sure it's a safe place to live. They all have to have a complete medical workup, a complete psychological workup, and now unfortunately we need to check all their social media. So they do get Facebook checks. Basically, we don't really reject people for if they have what we consider inappropriate, like if they say they hate their boss, I really don't care. But if they're, have a picture of themselves having a cigarette, then obviously I'm going to care because we only take non-smokers. Or, drinking with a pregnant belly, that's going to be a problem. But in general, the actual appropriateness, social appropriateness of their Facebook is not really a criteria.
Are those checks maintained throughout the pregnancy, or is it just screening purposes?
We don't repeat the criminal and the home study, but the kinds of checks that you're repeating are all the medical screenings because we're getting all their records from every doctor's appointment. If you wanted to check their Facebook, once they're matched, you're going to have access to their Facebook. I guess you'd be like me. I'm on my 16-year-old's Facebook every 5 minutes. What'd you post that for? But I usually caution people, to be honest, not to become too friendly on the Facebook unless, if you friend them on Facebook, they're going to know your whole personal life that you post on Facebook. So if you don't mind that, I don't have a personal Facebook page. I only have a law firm Facebook page because I'm the kind of person who's paranoid. So it really just depends on your openness to that kind of stuff, whether or not. Believe it or not, one of our biggest problems now in contract negotiations is what can be posted on Facebook, what can be texted, what can be blogged, what can be posted. Because now, once you take a picture of somebody's kid, you could send it, to Africa in less than a second, and it could be all over the news. So that is a big, and the population of people who are carriers, they tend to live in rural areas. Facebook is a very popular way to connect for people who are stay-at-home moms, children, soccer moms. So you do have to be careful about what you want on these social media sites. Apparently I have no time left also, so if you have any questions, I'm going to be at my table. Also, I did want to let everyone know that usually our consultations are $475 for the 2 hours in our office, but they're free for anyone who attended the conference. So do make sure you pick up a coupon or sign up for one if you're interested. We're a train right away, and we will pick you up at the train station, which is about half a mile from our office. It's about 45 minutes on the train.
What city?
Montvale. You do have to switch in Hoboken or Secaucus.
I guess we can keep on going until they kick us out. The next group will come in.
Anyone have any questions?
It sounds all it's all about positive stories today. What can go really wrong, legally and
Legally, you don't really see as many problems legally with something wrong. The bigger problems are international people without any insurance for the newborn coverage, but also the bigger problems are miscarriages, babies with defects, which same-sex couples don't tend to see because babies with defects tend to be with older eggs. But the problem, honestly, that you're going to have with the donor eggs, don't put in too many embryos. I have a same-sex couple that put in 3 embryos. One split, they're having quads. So, it's a lot of babies at once. Not only is that a very dangerous pregnancy, that's, 4 kids to send to college at the same time. And for someone who's having 2 going at the same time, I'm already having a heart attack. So wait till you see the bill for 4. So, the number of embryos is very important.